Let's catch up with Cabinet Minister now, Anne Ruston. She's the Minister for Families and Social Services. I caught up with her just a little earlier before we came on air. Anne Ruston, thanks for joining us. Look, I've got to say I've been around politics for a long while and we always talk about the need for reassurance and bipartisanship. But I think, even from my hard-bitten sort of experienced eye, it was very reassuring this afternoon to see not only Scott Morrison but state premiers, Labor and Liberal, all putting up a concerted effort for a common-sense plan for this country.
Oh, look, absolutely, Chris. I mean, I hope most Australians had the opportunity to watch that press conference because, I mean, as you say, we've been around this game for a very long time, but to sit there and see the level of understanding that the Prime Minister had for the details of this particular issue that's before us, I think gave us all great confidence that we're in really good hands, both from the health response to this virus, but also to the economic response, that his response has been measured, it has been considerate, it has been proportionate, and obviously the Premiers and the state, the Chief Ministers from the territories have seen that as well, and they've got in behind the Prime Minister, and we'll see a really coordinated, united front going forward to manage the rollout as this virus takes hold in Australia in whatever form it does take hold.
Yeah, I think there's nothing partisan in this. I think Dan Andrews, as the Premier of Victoria, the Labor Premier there, has shown strong leadership, Gladys Berejiklian, the others. So I think that's reassuring. The challenges are going to mount, though. This is going to be a very, very difficult winter for Australians. Cancelling these mass gatherings now is just the first step. But we're going to see these premiers, territory leaders and the Prime Minister meeting now on a regular basis, weekly national cabinet. This is almost a wartime setting. We've seen nothing like this before. It's historic, isn't it? And they'll need to keep on their game to keep the community reassured.
Yeah, well, the community should be reassured. I think if you have a look at the responses around the world, you would have to agree, everyone would have to agree that Australia's response has been so far ahead of the game in comparison to everybody else's, and that we should be reassured by that. But also the fact that the Prime Minister, as he said in his press conference, you know, this is a considered response. It is a precautionary response. We want Australians to, you know, obviously to be alert but not alarmed, and to go about their everyday lives, but also be mindful of the fact that they don't put themselves at risk. And that's particularly important for people who are in a high-risk cohort, people with respiratory problems, you know, our elderly, our Indigenous people, probably need to take greater precautions than you and I do. But we do need to be alert to the consequences of what's happening before us, but we also need to not be alarmed and to go about our everyday lives and to make sure that we are responding proportionate to the risk that is before us.
Now, the only thing that I would suggest additional in terms of creating that Team Australia response and that national reassurance that the Prime Minister and Premiers are obviously trying to deliver would be perhaps to invite the federal opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, to join that national cabinet. Do you think that's a proposal that could possibly be considered?
Well, I think one of the things that I'd like to see Anthony Albanese take is a much more bipartisan approach. I was a little disappointed to see his press conference this morning and his commentary where he was playing partisan politics with this issue. And this afternoon we saw the premiers and the chief ministers of his same persuasion coming out and getting in with the Prime Minister and saying that they were going to take a coordinated approach. So I'd like to think that Anthony Albanese might sort of show an act of good faith and actually demonstrate his bipartisanship before we start taking this any further.
All right, I'll take that as a no for now. Let's get on to the nitty-gritty here. You talked about the differing risks for differing cohorts of Australians, I suppose. That's the important point here, isn't it? To remember that we don't have Armageddon coming down upon us, that the disease is manageable. Sadly, of course, like the flu, that there will be fatalities. But the key here is to slow the spread. And even if you're not worried about your own ability to withstand the coronavirus or COVID-19, it's behoven upon you, in order to protect the community around you, to do all you can to stop it spreading.
Look, absolutely. And I think the medical response to this is those people who are vulnerable obviously need to take extra precautions, and those of us that aren't vulnerable also need to be mindful of the exposure to those that are more vulnerable. But I think the medical response has been very clear. Also, there's been very clear information being provided to people. The Health Minister and the Chief Medical Officer doing daily press conferences, and I would encourage anybody who is concerned to certainly watch those daily briefings. But if you are in a very vulnerable cohort, to contact Centrelink or Services Australia and find out what are the things that you need to be doing, and equally getting in touch with your local medical practitioners. Call them up and find out what things you need to do to make sure that you protect yourself and your loved ones going forward, to make sure that you're as prepared as you possibly can be for whatever might happen.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about the stimulus and recession and all of that. In my humble view, I don't think we can avoid recession. I think the global economy is going to go into hibernation for the next few months, and there's nothing Australia can do to withstand that. But we'll wait and see on that. So the government's obviously got to do something, and the most important thing is try and keep people in jobs. We've seen that as part of the stimulus package. But as Families and Social Services Minister, you must be very concerned about the number of people who won't get enough work or have to take time off casual work because of the illness, people who lose their jobs because industries are downturning. We're seeing Flight Centre shed jobs and shut offices today. So you must be expecting quite a hit on the welfare budget, and you must be prepared to dig deep to help Australians get through this.
Look, absolutely, and we are very conscious that there are a number of people who are going to be impacted by this virus as it rolls out over the next few months. The stimulus package was put in place to make sure that we could support business, because we need business to stay in business, because business employs people. But we do also understand that there is likely to be an impact, hopefully as shorter term impact as possible, and people will find themselves where they may need a little bit of extra assistance. So to that end, I mean, our social security system is already very well placed to respond to people who find themselves without work. But we've been working with the employment sector and with Services Australia to make sure that we can respond very, very quickly to people who find themselves in a situation where, because they've had a downturn in their employment and they no longer have work, particularly casuals, people who work in the gig economy, people who find themselves that they have to self-isolate because they're in a position where they can't go to work, that we can respond absolutely immediately to them when they present at Centrelink. And can I just say, Chris, that one of the things that's really bothered me has been some social media scaremongering around sickness allowance. Currently, we have a number of payments that are all called by different names. In a few days' time, on the 20th of March, we will be rolling them into one payment. Included in that is sickness allowance. Sickness allowance, as it exists today, will continue into the future. There will be no change. If somebody finds themselves sick because they have caught coronavirus or any other sickness for that matter, or they're having to self-quarantine because of coronavirus, they will still be eligible for sickness allowance as it currently exists today. So I just want to reassure everybody that there is that these rumours that sickness allowance is no longer going to exist are absolutely wrong.
Well, that's a very important reassurance, because there are going to be a lot of calls on that in coming months. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chris.